Okay, so good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. The American Irish Historical Society here in Manhattan or the Irish American Heritage Museum up in Albany. I'm delighted to have with us tonight Frank J. Cunningham, who's a genealogist, a poet, and a writer, and is a native of Mayo. God help us at home in Ireland. There's always a bit of rivalry between Mayo and Kerry. He's lived in America now for over 4 decades or around 4 decades, and he reads Irish, German, and French. Frank is going to talk to us basically to share insights and tips about researching the family ancestry, which is designed for both the novice and the professional. But he's here to kind of talk to you about some of the potential minefields and roadblocks that you might meet and other potential sources if you think you've come across, one dead end, that there might be another way around it. So I'll turn it over to you now, Frank, and anyone who's on the call, if you have any questions, you can use the Q&A feature down here or the chat feature and just type your answer and I'll kind of navigate all of those for you. So welcome, Frank, and thanks very much for joining.
Well, thanks, Elizabeth, and thanks for inviting me. Um, I'll start off with a background on myself, and then I'll clip through a bunch of bullet points I've written down. I got into genealogy back in the early 90s, um, and how I came up with the 5 bullet points over time as to how I should approach any particular project. Basically, I'd start off with getting the who, the name right, the spelling right, the when, the important dates in that particular person's life or family's life, where they came from, where they're going, and the what they did and where they did it, and the why did they immigrate? And I should stress they might sound very simplistic, but as we go along, you'll see that there's some complications to them. Um, I like to joke and say that I got into genealogy because my mother, as a child, I was one of 12, and she knew everybody within the family's history within 20 miles of the house. And that was a common thing back there then. You could say, well, that person, who's married to who, and what townland, which is smaller than the village they came from. Um, and that got me intrigued how she could do that. And then, I'm one of 12 children, and I have 49 first cousins, and I have 32 nephews and nieces. And up to recently, I could name them all and say what they were doing. So as I grew up in Ireland and knowing where everybody was and who was related to who, and particularly who had immigrated, especially if you were thinking of traveling yourself, as most of us were inclined to do up to probably the mid 90s from economic necessities and such. Um, I lived in Europe. I've basically been an immigrant in a couple of countries. I did a college degree in the University of Galway in Bachelor of Commerce. Um, and then I went to England and worked in England, and then Holland, France, Germany, Belgium, and worked at all sorts of different jobs and met all varieties of people. And I found invariably when you're traveling, it's the other foreigners you sort of bump into, and you have a certain graw, a certain kind of appreciation and kindness towards them, and them to you. And again, I was intrigued about coming to America, and eventually I came here in '85, and I've been here since. Um, and then a big interest of mine is history and geography, and always has been, and political science. So, reading international papers, keeping an eye on England, Ireland here, and the longer you're here, the more immersed you become in what's going on here. And then in the early 90s, I started doing genealogy. And each family obviously comes from a different place and history. And to try and understand why they came and where they came from and what they were doing, you end up reading a lot of history and studying a lot of maps. And then over years, you sort of intuitively know where to go when somebody comes to you from another family. They might not particularly be of that ethnicity, but they might have come in that particular decade. So it accumulates a great sense of how to uh, zone in on what you need to know about these people. So I'll give you a little example. I normally start off with who am I looking for? Many people were illiterate and they were dependent on others to write their names. So those people that wrote their names invariably were those that met them when they came here, Ellis Island and whatever. And they might be of another culture or language, and they might misspell it and spell it phonetically. So, for example, your first name might be Moses, but it's Morris. Uh, you might be Anne when you leave Ireland, but by the time you come here, you're Annie or Annabelle. Uh, another example would be you leave Ireland as Mary Bridget, but when you arrive here, you're Bridget Mary. And so many different reasons. So when you're told your ancestors a particular name, you have to take that with a certain pinch of salt. Um, Another one would be the surnames, the same thing. You know, the sound of the end of the surname could be cut short, or the middle letter could be changed or removed, or yet again changed at the end or beginning. For example, I did a family, they were Charleston, Charleston, but by the time I got to them, they were Charlton, just the Charlton, were from Northern Ireland. A Jewish family I did, they left Galicia in Europe as Friedsams, and by the time I figured it all out, they were Friedsons, Sohn, instead of Friedsam. So many examples. I'm sure you have an idea yourselves, like Berg to Burger, O'Donnell to with two L's to O'Donnell with one, O'Connell to Connell. And then other reasons would be that the first decade, you could be brought here by your parents, and you have your first name, John, and then your father passes away, and he's Patrick. So suddenly you're carrying your father's name for the second decade. And it gets confusing when you're looking at the files because you're looking for the son, but you can't find him. But then as you go up a decade or two, you might find that he files for citizenship and he states his real name. Or when he passes away, it's on the death cert, or a child of his might put it on the death cert or her death cert. Another one, misinterpretation of the name, as I was saying, like, or even in the family, you might think, well, he was William because we were Protestants, but he might have been, after William of Orange, but he might have been after William the Conqueror, who was Catholics. And again, I'm not trying to dissuade you from searching, but it can get very confusing. Another would be I did a family from the Azores, the islands between here and Europe, and I was looking up a family and I couldn't find the particular person, and I happened to meet on the plane back here a person from the Azores, and I was explaining to my difficulty, and they said, "Oh well, we're very isolated, and if a man has no children or they've died off, and he's alone, we give him one of our children, and they take his name, so he dies happy, knowing his name hasn't died with him." So that then you start looking from a different angle to find that person. Um, then the second thing, once you have the name, you say, well, when did they come? And you can be told by your family they came, and before the famine, after the famine, or during it, or much later. But then there could be a decade off. It could be just word of mouth. Everybody around the place lost people in Ireland heading to America and other places during the famine. So they assume that. So no need to remember your name up to the mid 19th century. In England, it was 1839 that you had to remember your date of birth, excuse me. And in Ireland, it was 64 when you had to register it. And I even noticed my own mother believed for a long time she was born a year younger than she was, because she was born in mid-November, but they had a family business in the town, and the father was too busy to go and register in the main town her birth till February. So anyway, she gained a year. Again, she fell. So people so many reasons you should doubt the age you're given. For example, they might adjust to qualify, a girl might adjust her name to qualify to get married, pretend she's a few years older. She might reduce her name to attract a younger suitor, or a son might want to join the army or not join the army, and the parents put down his age lower or higher. Um, and then vanity, you you might want to impress the spouse that you're younger, or the census taker that comes to your house might be a neighbor's child, and you don't want the whole neighborhood to know. So the whole family, if they have a daughter that's getting up in age and she hasn't been married yet, they all might drop 5 years on the census. So she sounds a lot younger. So it's amazing what turns up when I go digging. Um, and another one that I found a good few times was obviously a lot of girls came over to America on their own, and they figured they'd work 5, 7 years, get a good dowry, and go back. But it didn't quite work out, or the wages weren't too good, so they might spend a dozen years here. So suddenly, you'd find her going back and getting married 7 years at an age 7 years younger than she actually was, and sometimes it's very hard with all the similar names in around a particular town or village to know which girl is the girl you're looking for. But sometimes you might find in the censuses that one of these girls only had 3 or 4 kids, while all the others had a half a dozen or more. And then you start thinking, well, you zone in on that girl and say, well, she was a little too old to have many children, but she brought home a suitcase of money. So the man that married her was quite happy with the dowry, but he didn't end up with enough kids. Uh, Another would be a person's age can be a challenge, as I'm saying. So one can see how time consuming it is to track a person by their name. You really have to cross check. You have to, unfortunately, you have to doubt what you're finding most of the time. Um, then you look at where. Well, where were they born? The geography of origin. The townland, which, as I said, is smaller than a village. The village, the shekel, a small Jewish village, the Dorf, the hamlet, all these things, the town. And what I even found when I went to London myself first in the mid 70s, I kept having people telling me he knew somebody from my hometown. And I felt I knew most people from my hometown. And then I would be brought to meet that person in the pub, and they would be from 40 miles away. I'm from Ballina and Mayo, and he was from outside Belmullet, but it was the nearest postal address at the time. And it was, people tend to say they're from the biggest town. Who would really know where, Caraculloch is or whatever? So again, uh, I actually while I was getting ready for this, I looked up John Nagel, that left the house to the American Irish Society back in the early 20th century. And I looked up I said, well, I find a few examples of what I'm talking about. And I found that he said he was from Castletown Roach in Cork. And this man was a historian himself, and actually found his papers of applying for passports and citizenship, and he scribbled in extra notes about the details. And it's a treasure trove when you find a person like that. But I like to go to the primary sources, and even in his case, I went to his birth the his birth or baptism record in the local church records, and he says he's from Castle Roach. But if you look closely at it, it's the child above him is from Castle Roach, but he was from Ballymacphilip, but they had just put the B and the M and Philip. So anyone that doesn't look closely enough would say, "Oh well, that must have been one of his godfathers, or he had two godfathers, or whatever." And then from that Ballymacphilip, I found that Admiral Nagel was from Ballymacphilip. So then assumed that John was related to him, but it's not factually known. But that's another bit of research. Um, so again, the geography, the province, the territory, the county, the shire, all these different names of where they're from, um, and what is its child's name before and after birth, so as to trace ancestors and descendants, because the patterns of migration. Sorry, I'm losing myself a little there. The patterns of migration is forced or voluntary. Like, did he have to leave that particular place? Was there a war, or was it like the Ulster plantation? And was the child born at sea, or was it born on the journey? So it's it's it gives you great knowledge if you learn. Sometimes when in the death cert it says born at sea, and then you can nearly date when he came, because most ships record the birthing. Um, then after the where, we go to the what. Like, what profession did they leave their country with? And is that the same profession they ended up with? And what you'll find, even when I came, people come over with, and even still today, with qualified professions, but there's no money in them. You have to do extra exams, or there's such a need to get a home to bring over your wife and kids, or your siblings, that you end up doing whatever brings in money the quickest. So for the Irish, most go into either, for the women into housework, and the men into construction work. And but then what happens is you find that as they get settled, they switch back into their profession. So you might find suddenly somebody that was working as in construction or as a waiter, you find them 2 decades later and they're a lawyer. Um, and then they climb, if not a waiter, they climb the ranks, and then you see they own a restaurant, and then the whole family gets into catering, or they get into new industries. So it's interesting that the great thing about coming to America is you can come with nothing, and you can get into a profession and rise very quickly. And if it doesn't suit you, you can, for all sorts of reasons, leave it and find another one. So that makes it difficult to find the person. In one decade, you find them as a construction worker or a waiter, and then in the next decade, he's running a business, or he's a tailor, or he's running, a blacksmith or whatever. Um, so there's, but then also, if you're looking for them, you look at what town they come into, and you see what explosive industries are happening there, and then they get into that. It could be, the cotton industry, the linen industry. And again, if they come from areas in Ireland where that was prevalent and they come here, then look for them in those neighborhoods where those industries are. For example, if your ancestor was down in census in Ireland as a shoemaker, well, then you might find them in a factory in Lynn, Massachusetts, or somewhere like that, where this was renowned for shoe factories. But the interesting thing about that was that when the Irish came out in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, um, if you had a profession, if you were a tailor or a shoemaker, you worked for 25 years. You took on an apprentice. He became a master after doing 7 years apprentice, 7 years journeyman, wandering around. So you have to follow him wandering around to different towns till he finds a place where a shoemaker or a tinsmith has retired, and there's an opening to set up as a master. And the fact that they journey around, with the horse and cart and their tinware or their shoemaker is because it's less expensive to live, and they can accumulate enough money to buy a little house and set up in a town where it's possible. So again, you're wandering all over the place, following the name and wondering, is that him or not? Then some you find some come here totally prepared for work. I've done German families where they've landed and headed west, and they've made the wagon in Germany and filled it up with everything they need except water and mules. And then when they land in Philly or wherever, they just buy what they need and head west. So it's quite difficult to find that person for about 10 or 20 years till or 30, till where they go develops enough to set up censuses and records and archives. Um, so also, you want to understand why they left. That gives you another hint of where they might head. They might have left, these reasons, obviously, I say, will help you. They might have left for adventure, the pioneer spirit, uh, inspired by readings of people who have gone before, relatives that have gone. I remember as a child, my mother's uncle, he went in 27, and I'm coming home, and, he was well fed looking, and his kids were, and he brought all sorts of presents. I remember he brought my father bait, fishing bait, but they were the colors of the rainbow. And when he tried them in the river, he reckoned the salmon ran for their lives with the colors. So it's like you, he brought some trousers for us, some pants, but they were lime green, and it was just the disconnect of the cultures. He had been gone for 40 years. He had an American accent, and but he came home. And then I went out in 85 and I went to visit him in Brooklyn. And I remember him telling me that he was one of the first Free State policemen in Milltown Malbay in County Clare. And his cousin wrote to him from Lower East Side Manhattan and said, great dance halls, great work, lots of fun, come on out. And he came out and he said he didn't get on his feet. The war came, the depression came, the war, and he didn't get on himself and his wife on their feet till the 50s. And he couldn't come home till the 60s. And then he says to me, I came in the mid 20s, my nephew came in the mid 50s, and you're coming in the mid 80s. They'll be coming again in the mid 10s. So, it's like, we all know there's a lot of us here. It could be the economy, no hope, the famine, recession, the distribution of wealth where you were brought up. It's not easy to get a foothold. You hear how you get to America, which was true, a lot of opportunities. Parents sacrifice to send you away. Then you have, on the understanding, once you've made money, you bring siblings out and then more siblings. I, for example, came and I had 4 brothers and 3 sisters follow me out. But as it happened, Ireland took off slowly in the 90s, and 5 of them went back. So you could be social. You look at the history. Was the family politically or socially ostracized? Could be politics, religion, freedom. So it's fascinating when you're looking up your family to look at what was happening in wherever they came from and what was happening here. And I like to say that the joy of doing ancestral research is sort of guessing that the socioeconomic and political aspects of them having left Ireland, where would they've come to over here, and who would they've come to, and where were. When I came in the 80s, I was told, the Galway people were in Boston, um, Cork and Mayo were in Chicago, Cleveland was Mayo, and Kerry were in New York. And then in New York, the Kerry and Mayo were in the Bronx, and then the Dubs were in Queens. So you wandered around and met all. And I remember I spent 4 years in the Bronx in 85. And if somebody came and they were looking for friends or relatives, you could name the pubs that county drank in or predominantly drank in. The Green Isle was Mayo. You had the Own Bug, I think it was called, was Monaghan. But anyway, Ireland's 32 was Kerry. And anyway, it went on. I could go on. So, in talking about that, I like to say that when to start an initial search, I think the best thing to do is to go back the earliest, and I'll concentrate on Ireland for the moment. The earliest would be the Tithes Allotments records from 1827 to 34. They're the earliest. And the greatness of those is that when you go into them, let's say whatever name you use, Murphy, and you believe they're from Galway, well then you put in the name Murphy and you see how many heads of family come up for the whole of Ireland. And then you get a sense of how many Murphys there were then. And then you zone in on the county you're particularly interested in. And then you say, oh, it's reduced to 10 families. And then if you have obviously a first name in the person you're looking for, you look to see is that name among them. So you see how you start to zone in on where they possibly might be from. Then once you have that, then you break it down to town, village, townlands. And then you go to the Griffiths valuation in the mid 19th century. And you see, again, put the name in, county, see how many, and you see how big a record you're delving into. And then you build, then the next record, unfortunately, is the 1901 census and the 1911. So for most of the people I'm looking for, they're in the 19th century, they're already gone. But surprisingly, you'll find a sister or a brother or a cousin or even a mother that's living into her 90s or 80s. And then you can start seeing, did they come home? You look up the immigration. If you can't find them going out, you look to see that because there's records of them going back home for a visit. So that's one way of doing it. Then I would advise reading a bit of history, as I was saying, around the area they came from. And you'll start recognizing names associated with the family or particular names for that county. And that also gives you a hint of where they might be. And then geography, where did they land? If they landed in Philly, you know they're actually probably heading further south or further west. If they landed in a big city like Boston or New York, they're probably going to, the furthest out would be Long Island or up a little north or west of it. And if you get the history, you'll find like they set up churches, they set up organizations, and they have some records. Obviously, you do the births, deaths, and marriages. I have a few cautions. I would say just be very careful of, it can get very tiring trying to read the old cursive and you find what you think is the family, but double, treble check because the names are so repetitive. So if you're wishing a result, i.e. an age, the name, a profession, and then call a halt to the search, you might lose out. And allowing a coincidence to become a non-credited fact, it's very tempting. And then, when you start getting good at it and learning some, you you allow it, your imagination takes over and you start creating a reality for them that suits what you heard. But in saying that, I've found I've done about 400 or 500 families. I've found that when people come to me and they have one pertinent fact that came up through the family, invariably I find there's an awful lot of there's something in that. It's like a clue, and sometimes it isn't. I had one woman, and she came to me. I lived on Nantucket for 27 years. I'm down for the last two in Atlanta for family reasons. But she came to me and said, the reason we're on Nantucket is my family are all great sailors. We have been since my great grandfather. He was a great windjammer and he traveled sailed all the time. And we all sail. and we don't know a lot about him. So would you look him up? We know he went down to the Caribbean a lot in the winter, particularly Cuba. We've heard stories of Cuba. So I came back to her a few weeks later and I said, I found him, but he wasn't a sailor. He played a wooden instrument, a wind instrument in a circus. And that circus wintered in Cuba. And that's why he went to Cuba every winter. And she wasn't amused. But uh, sometimes, it's hard to take um, what you tell people. Uh, Another great example is I find a lot of people, they say to me, Americans say, my great grandfather was a herdsman. He was a shepherd, and it's like, and then he came and he made it big, or he didn't, or what, but he came here. But in their minds, he was a shepherd up on a hill. But if you look up in Ireland, a very unique style of herdsmen in the west of Ireland, particularly Mayo, Galway, Roscommon, but other places, not much known about it. But herdsmen didn't get paid weekly. They got an acre of land from the landlord, and they could till it and plant whatever, and they could keep either on that land, they could keep a horse and a foal till the foal was 3 years, or two ewes and three lambs. So as he was herding the sheep, he would have his own two ewes in lamb along with the landlord's in lamb. And to do that, he had to have trained dogs. He had to be a good shot keep the foxes away with a rifle. He had a horse because he had to roam around a lot. He had to have great veterinary sense of diseases and how to ail them. He had to birth them. He had to know the quality of breeding them, and he had to sell them. So by the time that man got on a boat to go to America, he was a pretty shrewd and capable person, and he would turn his hand to any industry over here. And so I try to instill that in a lot of people, that this idea that, okay, the Irish might have been uh, educationally, famished, for a better word, due to the English influence. And they might be financially straitened. But as regards, having, integrity of character, strong will to succeed, and a great work ethic, absolutely. Now, as an immigrant, I know the loneliness of coming over, and then you go to places where you can meet your own and get away from the drudgery of the work you're only learning to do, and the loneliness, and a lot would get lost in alcohol. But that doesn't necessarily mean, that it was as prevalent as one seems to be told. And I have found otherwise. I have found that so many, basically, their primary concern was climbing, getting their children up into better situations, and so many of them did that. Um, uh, let's see now. Or, yeah, as I said, the best thing is to start early with the earliest censuses, less of a population and a bigger probability that you might find something about your family. And funny enough, these days I find myself, when I get a new name, I'll go Google it, and I'll Google the date or around that date, or the period. And another great asset now is newspapers.com. You can put in the name of the person, excuse me, and you might find either a marriage notice, a child's christening, a child's birthday, wedding, etc. But and then again, they used to put missing Irish people. Ancestry has that in other places. I predominantly use Ancestry because it has such a broad reach. Family Search, which is free. Ancestry if you just want to initially get into it, 1880 census is free. And the greatness of the 1880 census is it puts down profession. So if you have an inkling as to what your ancestor might have been working at, you can put that name in and that profession, and you might find only a few of them, and that'll zone you in on trying to find the person. Um, Again, talking about Google, if you Google, best way to start ancestry research, they'll give you all these hints. But I do think that before before you, if you tend to go and hire a professional, you should delve in somewhat beforehand because it'll strengthen your connection with the idea of finding the family. And I like to say that, a lot of people are a little nervous they'll find skeletons in the closet. But, I have found that absolutely there's, most families do have a couple of wayward characters, but you'll find heroes in there as well. And, I like to say, uh, the parents, my mother had 12 kids, but I'm a writer, and I jokingly say, someday I'm going to write my own life stories or whatever. And people say, "Oh, that's really nice, Frank." And I say, "Yeah, I have the first sentence." And they'll say, "Well, what is it?" And I say, "I'm on a 12, but I say I was an only child till 11, and then I looked behind me." We all Irish mothers were great for making you feel you're the only child, or you're important, and that strength when you head out as an immigrant, and the morals and the rules and the integrity and the decency you're taught. As I look through all these families, I see it, and so I wouldn't worry too much about skeletons. I'm sure each family have a successful, and you can define that yourself, people in your family. Um, and again, for fun, you could immerse yourself in that time period. Watch movies from then, clothes, um, art, poetry, food, drink, and enjoy the search. And then when you get frustrated, then maybe hire somebody. But start talking with the rest of your family about it. But it's best to have something, I wouldn't say profound, but something, not even startling, but something about the family that no one in the family knew. For example, what propelled me more to get into it than anything, I think, was that when my father passed away, my brother, who's a lawyer, showed me uh, my grandfather's discharge papers from the First World War. And of the 12 kids, he said, none of us knew of this. I happen to have known because I joined the Fórsaí Cosant na hÉireann, the National Guard in Ireland. And my father had told me, but he told me he worked in a canteen behind the lines. But I went looking and I found that he was wounded in battle. And I found not only that, but I found three of his brothers went that no one in the family knew. This was up till 1995. And that was understandable because and when I grew up, if you had anything to do with the British Army, it was frowned on. But not only that, but my grandmother on my mother's side, her cousin was the leader of the flying column in Mayo. And so there was two sides of the family. But in saying that, when I did more and more research, I contacted the Connacht Rangers, the battalion he was in, the archivist, and he was kind enough to send me any information he could find. And he sent me a poem that one of my granduncles wrote during the war. He actually died in Basra in Iraq in 1916, January 1916. But in the poem, you couldn't be more nationalistic towards Ireland and home rule and everything. But but he joined the army because they were from a town in Mayo and there was no work in that period. So they went joined the army to go to India, but ended up in the First World War. But I digress a little. But again, fascinating stories all over the place. And if you can twist them and romanticize them, or make them heroes, and then turn to your family and tell them that might enthuse them and you to do more. I should start wrapping up a bit to take a few questions. Oh yeah, why hire a professional genealogist? Well, it expedites it, organizes it because of more experience. And at the best, they create a scenario that you can go and present. But I strongly suggest do it yourself first till you get a headache and then go. And as I said, I say skeletons keep company with heroes in closets. Don't worry about it. And I say my mother raised 12 children. She is my hero. But I think as the older you get, you realize how much work that was. And I said, as for the skeleton, that's kept in the family, you know, unless you want to talk about it. But another thing a lot of people, a lot of Irish did when they came out, they were coachmen. And again, I did it for a family, and they weren't impressed when they heard their ancestor was a coachman. And I said to them, it's how you look at it. A coachman, he had to take whoever he worked for on a wintry night to some country estate, either in Ireland or in America, galloping at top speed, 4 to 6 horses, and then bring them home. The horses had to be healthy. They had to be the best presented. The harnesses had to be, pure leather and looking well oiled. The carriages had to be painted and gilded. He had to feed them. He had to have a groom or two to help them. He did a lot of. He had a lot of work to, and he had to be a capable enough man to defend the people in the carriage if need be. And another aspect of it was that typically, if he did all that well, the the landlord or the wealthy owner or whatever would tip him well after a weekend. Um, so, and out of that, the sons get educated or they go on when cars come in to become chauffeurs and then they climb up to owning garages and whatever. That's another point I should make. It's it fascinates me how many people ask me to find their families and whatever profession they're in, 3 or 4 generations back, their ancestor is doing elementary aspects of the skills of that profession today, but within the same business. Um, I think I should leave it at that. Uh,
I'm just coming in to say that was fantastic, Frank. I took a few notes and I enabled the captions just in case people. I think when you said about the allotments or the tithes, I can't remember what that first thing was called. Are these records online? You know,
oh
like
yes,
they,
they're
yeah.
all online, and
Mhm.
they're invariably free these days. Um, so you can look up the tithe, TITHES allotments, APPLOTMENTS. If you just Google it, they come up. And again, uh, the Irish government has the Catholic records on there, and they have 2 counties, well, 3 I think now. They have Kerry, Dublin, and Carlow, where they have the Catholic marriage records and so forth. But the primary ones, again, I would start with the tithe allotments and get a sense of where your family came from. And then Griffith's valuations, GRIFFITHS VALUATIONS valuations, and then up to the 1901, which is free online as well, Census of Ireland. Google Census of Ireland 1901 and it comes right up, and 1902, or sorry, 1911. And then you have Family Search, which is free. And then you have Find My Past, which you pay for. They have some interesting records. But if you want to start basic, just start with those first four. And then obviously ancestry.com, you could join them for a month. But if you accumulate what you're missing or what you're looking for, and then join Ancestry, it can be intimidating figuring out how to use it and reading but they're getting very AI, artificial intelligence induced. Hence, years ago, another great record is the city directories. It's within Ancestry. And that's a great one for you can look at we'll say, for example, 1952, you get the census and the family are in it, but you're wondering what they're working at or where they are, the kids. And you go to 53 and you go to that name and you look down through all the Johns and all the Marys and the Bridges, and you see what they're working and you see who's living with who. And invariably back then, the family didn't move too far afield. Now, I shouldn't say that because what happens, and for so many reasons, you could have one member of the family who rapidly succeeds and they're living in the same city, but they never meet again and they don't even realize they're related. And you think, well, that's a shame, you left your family. But if you think about the logistics, there was no subway, there were no cars, and you worked long hours and you worked at the level of income you had, and years go by and you're busy surviving, for a better word, or thriving. And people back then weren't that interested about their ancestry or even their brothers or sisters until we say they got up in their 60s or 70s, and then maybe it was too late. So don't judge the person that goes off. And mind you, uh, a lot of Irish anglicized their names as they got wealthy. That's another funny aspect of it. You find, and I've done families where I found that uh, they said to me, well, there must have been money there because they're very wealthy now. And they don't realize it was just that endeavor of the grandparents or the parents that sacrificed and worked so hard that propelled the family up. And a lot of times it's the youngest son, and I have to say it's mostly the male child that climbs. And then you tell their descendants, and they're shocked. And then they stop talking, sort of. But I do try to, when I write reports, I try to put in the socioeconomic and political aspects. And
But
I
I think that
explain the trades.
the women did well too, because very quickly, like within a generation, if your mom was a maid, the daughter was a teacher or a nurse, but there was less opportunities open to women in the 19th century or the early 20th. So like a man could become an executive, like in a bank,
Yeah,
or maybe go to law school
yeah,
or something.
yeah,
I think you made a very interesting point earlier on too about the names. Like there is no standard spelling. A lot of people are illiterate, even though I do think people underestimate how educated we are from Ireland because of the National Education Act.
yeah.
So that is something that people need to bear in mind. Like they
Yeah.
may have been able
And
to write,
and a lot of professions back then you didn't need to write.
Exactly.
So much
Yeah.
was done on a handshake, and it was
Yeah.
the
I'll make your mark.
understanding of the integrity of your whole history of the family. But
Yeah.
one other thing I noticed, and I say this personally, sometimes when I'm looking for a girl that came over, and I have to go through hours of scrolling through names and the immigration, and it makes you stop and pause, and you just 14-year-olds alone, because I recognize you're always looking to see who they're coming with, and then you realize they're with nobody, and then they get into a house and they're the maid and they have a half day off a week, and years go by and they're scrimping. I spent a few years, I have spent a few looking up De Valera's mother, And I mean, she's a classic example of coming out. Okay, she had a brother or two here, but one was in New Jersey, and she's stuck in the middle of Manhattan. And the only time you might meet is if you're close enough to a church and you get off on a Sunday. But and then to go home after 5 to 10 to 12 years of that and go back to Ireland, and you've changed so much. But all you're holding on to is the lump of money you have and the
Yeah.
hope to get settled and get back into. So I've looked up a lot of returned Yanks, for a better word, and weren't treated that well. I claim in my family I'm not treated that well when I go home because
Yeah.
the kids call me the Yank, Frank the
But I was
Yank.
just going to say you're very topical at the moment now on that, Frank, because Paul Mescal just hosted Saturday Night Live and he did a sketch about the returned Yank, with coverage with the Celtic cross tattoos and everything. You'll have to watch it. It's very funny. Not that we want to comment on it. We have a question here from Joanne. She's from my neck of the woods in Kerry. She said, what is the chance of finding records like a birth cert or a baptismal from 1852, possibly from Knocknagoshel, which is a little village outside Listowel?
I
My
know it. I know
maternal
of it.
great
Yeah,
grandmother is estimated
yeah.
to have been born there from, she must have the death cert. She said the death cert is 1885.
What's the
Hmm.
possibility? I would say it's good. The only problem with the birth, the did she say birth cert or baptismal cert?
I guess either, what would
Well,
either,
the
yeah.
birth certs don't are registered till 64, but the baptismal cert she should be able to find, but it takes time, and you have to practice reading because there's no normal way of writing by
But
the
are they
priest or
online,
the
Frank? That's what you were
recorders.
saying. Are those church records that you were talking about that
Yes,
they have?
yes,
Oh yeah.
and and
Oh yeah.
what I would advise is uh, time yourself. Do a do 15 minutes, and then get up to a half an hour, and you'll slowly your eyes will start to and stay disciplined. Look look for the name,
Yeah.
either the surname or the first name,
Hmm.
and she has a good possibility, I would think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, I mean, these are kind of some of those pitfalls we said before. Sometimes God love them like a baby dies, but the family might reuse a name. So like there'd be two Patricks or two
Yeah,
Bridgets.
I have
Yeah.
my the second child in my family passed away, and the 12th child is named after him. My father used to joke that he wanted it. There was a 15-year difference. My mother had 12 kids in 17 years. My father used to joke and says, "That's one son that will retire early, the youngest, because it was the same parents with the same name."
Yeah.
But yeah, you get a lot of that. Um,
And as you
what
say, the
tips? The only
handwriting
tip I
might be
can
messy.
Yeah, the only tip is don't beat yourself up if you're having difficulty reading it.
Mhm,
It's an acquired skill, but it's not that
mhm.
difficult, and
Yeah,
it's just again it's
practice kind of. Yeah.
repetitious, and that's why I stress play music from the time, have photos of the family around you, imagine it, so it calms you down, but also it enthuses you, and you're building a deeper understanding of your family. And it's not rocket science. It's like most things. It's just repetitive discipline, and but
And
not
I
to
was going
skip.
to say, Frank, there, if you did, Joanne, know the other names, like this came up in another workshop we did in Albany one time. Sometimes, like the same people that were the witnesses to the wedding might be the godparents, because there could be five and Dylans
Oh
in
yeah,
the village, So try to look for the people around them being the same.
that's a
Yeah.
great point because that's a great way of finding the names of the family. Oh, and that's one other. I meant to mention this. If you're having trouble finding, but your family, look out on the branches of the tree and look for unusual names. For example, I did a family from Cork, and the grandmother was Rosalina, but it turned out the father was a sailor in Cork, and but that pinned the family down. Oh yeah, we heard of aunt had a child of that name. Uh, and
Yeah,
again,
those exotic names, then they might come down the tree then.
yeah, and particularly in the baptism, the sponsors invariably are brothers and sisters, or they're from the same townland. So sometimes I use that if I'm not too sure which Mary Murphy I'm looking for. I look to see who the sponsors are, and then I look up that townland to see are those names living in it. And another thing, back in the 19th century, even in America, most people married very close neighbors, even distant cousins. But it was the tradition, but also it was Arensberg wrote about the an anthropology of the culture of a community in Ireland in the 30s, and as he said, the ties that kept them together was you do work for your family, and but you don't do it for any return. You just do it because they're either your neighbors or your family. And that creates that glue that you eventually marry into each other because you've been meeting since childhood, maybe saving the hay. When I was 11, my parents sent me to live in Connemara as a Gaelgore and go to the local national school for 4 months so I could get the entrance exam into a boarding school, uh, all Irish. But saving the hay, uh, gathering seaweed, the lorry coming and putting 40 of us instead of school in the back of it and going saving turf for the day. All these, if somebody was a little weak or the husband had died, it was understood you went down and helped them. And even as tired as you were, you accelerated the work to get that in. And same with when you go to America, you find your own and people get your work and get you organized. Um,
Joanne
a
says
bit
here that
scattered. I haven't done this
oh, you're
in
fine. Joanne
a
said
few
that
years.
just to give the information, her great grandmother was a teacher and she taught needlework in Trenearrock, which is outside Dwall. Then she married a teacher, Lynch from Rahi. So, that is obviously a good kind of lifestyle that they have there. But she's been searching for her for years. So it can be tricky.
You're whispering, Elizabeth.
Sorry, the bit of activity here in the office.
I'm
So
joking.
I was just going to say, yeah, that the names are one of the ways to check for it, and maybe the jobs then as well. Like that, if somebody maybe when they come to America, they might move upward within the same industry, so like maybe they were a cab driver, but then they might buy a cart or,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
there are kind of
yeah,
spokes, I suppose, on the wheel.
yeah.
Tyler
Well,
Alexander has recently written a book about the 5 points Irish, and he was saying, contrary to what we had thought for a long time, they are more upwardly mobile quicker than we thought, is if they knew someone here already. So that
yeah,
was the big hand up. If you had someone from your village to give you a job or, that kind of thing,
yeah,
that is what really changed your life. There's
yeah.
another question here. Oh no, Joanne just saying thanks. Have we anyone else? No, so there's no more open questions. Now, Frank, do you use that Ireland XO or Ireland reaching out, whatever it is? That's a kind of a good one too. But I suppose the caveat with all of these things is to not think that your Mike Kelly is the same Mike Kelly.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
yeah, but you use them all. But I think initially to get started, you go with the familiar, the ancestry, and again, ancestry. The 1880 is free, and sometimes they have others free, and Family Search is free, and Ireland is really. Oh, another one, but they've got rid of it is Roots Web, ROOTS Web. It's not in existence anymore, but if you put in a name and a townland or a town um, and Roots Web, it's people 20 years ago and 10 years ago
yeah.
asking
Who
each
had
other, do you
shared
know them?
yeah, it's
Yeah,
like a forum kind of, yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
And it was great. And then Cindy's List, which is a great, I should have mentioned that earlier. CINDI apostrophe S, Cindy's List. She has compiled everything you need to research. And you just go and giving you hints of how to work them and whatever.
Look, Frank, I think this was very helpful. We're delighted to have had you tonight, and there's no doubt it's a minefield. Like that's, as a historian and not a genealogist, I think what you guys do is amazing. I'm always a little bit skeptical because it's very hard, as I say, like there could be more Mike Kellys than one in town, and so like when you
Yeah,
think you find a clue, it mightn't be your guy.
yeah,
Or and again, some of we know like they didn't change names at Ellis Island because they're given the ship's
yeah.
manifesto. So
But it's
the name changing will have happened either in Ireland before they come
yeah,
or later, but like not at Ellis Island.
no, and but the thing is, more and more is coming online now, so you can cross-reference so many things, and and if you have a good understanding of your own family and the naming of them, they say, you name the first child after the um, the father of the father, and the first daughter, and then the second son after the mother's father. Yes, but it's not a golden rule, but you can see a sort of a repetitiveness in some of them. Then some of them arrive in America and they just take on American names, and but even that's a clue in itself because the kids will do the same.
Yeah.
Uh,
No, I think
I
it's very
find it
helpful.
fascinating. Hmm?
It is. And like to find out these stories, it's amazing. There's a beautiful article. I might try and share it at some stage. It's up on it's called the Fanula Factor, I think, and it was a historian who talked about returning immigrants. And you were saying it might have been an uncomfortable experience for them, but some of the women when they went back, this was about women. It was empowering for them because, as you said, Frank, they didn't have to marry. When they were
Yeah,
young, or they didn't have to marry the father
yeah,
or the guy that was deemed suitable or part of
yeah.
their level because they had their own money. But the other side of that was some of them, when they went back, decided, oh God, no, I can't stick it here. I'll have to go back again to America.
Oh, yeah. And
Mhm.
you just reminded me when I was a kid, my mother used to tell the story that myself and a friend, Michal Quinn, three sisters returned and bought a cottage just up the road from us. And they used to walk into town all together. And they were in their 60s, unmarried, the three of them. And we used to sing every time, Yankee Doodle went to town riding on a pony and all that. And she'd come out and run us. But yeah,
I was going to say, weren't they the wise women? And they were probably very
yeah.
glamorous and everything.
But other things was it's amazing how different people come and go here. There was another joke when I was in Ireland about the girl that went to England, and for 2 weeks, and she was asked when she came back, what was it like? And she says, "Oh God Almighty, the boat, I got as sick as a dog. Oh, geez, I thought I was going to die. But coming back was quite calm." Yeah, she had picked up.
Yeah, the accent, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Oh, John B. Keith stuff on
some
them.
people pick up accents to acclimatize and some don't.
Yeah.
Um, but you can't judge people for that.
No,
And
no.
again, final point, possibly, you cannot fault people who came out here and out of pure loneliness cut all ties with home, and out of fear of being rejected and not accepted because they were gone. And the longer they stayed, the more they felt they couldn't go home. And I've met those in England. I used to stay in these priest-run hostels when I was working on the buildings there. And I remember being sharing a room with a man. He at 13, which is probably around 1913, he walked from Connemara to the boat in Dunleary and never went home. And now he just lived in this place. They gave him breakfast and evening meal, and he sat in the park in Cricklewood in the day. He was my alarm clock at 5:30 every morning. He'd say, "Frank, you got to get up for the shovel," and you know, so many tragedies. Um,
Well, I think that London story in particular, a lot of displaced men that worked, hard physical jobs and maybe got into the
yeah,
drink and stuff. But you're right, Frank, and I think we don't, even in modern times, like, it is lonely to be an immigrant, even though you're loving it. But of course,
yeah,
your home is still home, and
yeah,
and I think that happened a little bit on both sides. I think there might have been guilt at home in Ireland that they weren't able to keep them. or that they
Yeah.
had to give up their children. It must be, but my own great grandmother had 14 kids and only one stayed in Ireland. And,
Yeah.
that must have kept her up at night as
Yeah.
a mother, like that we have nothing for them here. So,
No. I
mhm.
remember uh, my youngest sister, I think the seventh that came out to me. Uh, I knew the train left home at 1 o'clock, and we lived opposite the train. And since anytime we were going anywhere, everybody be out on the lawn waving off the person going by. And my mother had just waved my sister coming out to me, and I wanted to check when was she coming. And I just caught my mother, who never showed emotion much, and she was in convulsions of tears. And I said, what? And I realized I called him. She just waved, and she says, "What's wrong with this country? I raised them, and they're taken from me." And that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's a
That was in
survival
19
mechanism. Yeah,
yeah, that was in
to cut them off.
1990 or 95. But can you imagine back in the
Well, the
19th century?
1800s, like when you would never again
And
see.
they didn't speak English. We had
Yeah,
we could read and write, and we spoke English,
yeah,
and we had the telephone.
yeah,
They had very, very little.
yeah.
I mean, yeah, tragedy.
Well, and so that's it, the immigrant had to survive here and they had to live with it at home, and I think that all the time that sometimes it's harder looking at the empty chair at home than it is being away creating a new life. So look, thank you very much for this, Frank, and everyone who joined us. This will be available on our YouTube channel tomorrow, and if you have any questions, you can email the museum up in Albany or the Society here in New York. Frank, do you want to give your email address if anyone
Sure,
wants to
sure. If
follow up?
anybody I don't mind anybody having questions. And those two questions, I don't mind answering those people to the best
Okay.
of my ability,
Yeah.
as we say here, within reason.
Yeah.
Frank J. Cunningham,
Okay.
J. Middle Joseph. Don't forget Joseph
At gmail.com.
at
Yeah,
gmail.com.
so Frank J. Cunningham at gmail.com. I might put that under the talk. So anyway, thank you all very much for joining. And thank you, Frank. I wish you all Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays and a Happy New Year. And we'll be back next year with more programming. Tomorrow night, we've got our third and final talk on the Civil War. But otherwise, we'll be back in business in January.
Thanks again, Elizabeth, for the
Not
invite.
sure.
And
Yeah,
good luck
thank
to
you.
everyone. Happy
Yes.
holidays.
Yes,
Cheers.
you too. Take care, everyone. Good night.